At large. This is Palmetto Politics, episode 4. Today we're going to be talking about Haley's announcing her run for president. But before we get started, I'm Shannon Grady, and that is
John Cummings.
John Cummings. Yeah, John and I are, we were just talking before we started about Nikki's run, and his contention, and I kind of agree, is go ahead, John. We're just talking about in terms of where you think she'll place just in South Carolina.
I think if she runs in the primary in South Carolina, I'm sure she will because it's early. I think she'd probably come in fourth, maybe fifth, if Governor DeSantis gets in and other people that you think might get in. I think if Ted Cruz got in, she'd finish behind Ted Cruz. So
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the angle is. I read a very interesting article yesterday from Mediaite, which is really a left leaning website, and they said that Nikki Haley she's running for the leadership position in a party that doesn't exist. It was a very interesting take from the left, meaning that part of the party has not all but disappeared, but that whole Bush side not as popular as it was. It's going to be Jeb Bush 2.0.
Right. Well, and I've also heard rumors, and I think this is probably closer to the truth. I don't think she really believes that she has an opportunity or a chance to win the presidency. I think she is trying out for vice president. That's what I think this is. She, a lot of times these folks, they get in this race and they want to show whoever the top candidate ends up being, whether it's Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Ted Cruz, whoever it's going to be. She wants to show them, look, I've got what it takes to be your running mate. And if something, God forbid something happened to you, I would be able to step in. And so a lot of times this is just a rehearsal for a vice presidential role. And I suspect that's true. But,
yeah, and I don't think she'd get it. One, because she kind of bailed on President Trump in 2018 in October when she resigned as UN ambassador before the midterms in 2018. So that's kind of a bailout. And I think the other thing that really hurts Governor Haley is that she's really been out of the public eye pretty much for 4 years. I mean, that's a long time. You resigned in October of 18, and now you're in 2023. Whatever wave of popularity you had is gone.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing about politics. It disappears pretty fast. And like I said, over 4 years is a long time. It'll take her a long time to rebuild that momentum. And I just don't know if it's possible.
Now, I have seen some folks supporting her on Facebook in Palmetto State. Some folks have already come out and said, hey, I'm behind Nikki Haley all the way. Now, the other thing that I felt like hurt her, particularly in our state, is her comments after the January 6th, 2020 event, or 2021 event, rather, when she basically blamed President Trump for that. I think that was going to help her in a future gamut for office. And it certainly, as you noted, he he doesn't forget those kind of things. So the odds of her being selected as his running mate, were he to win the top of the ticket, I think are pretty slim to none. That being said, it was an interesting day, and the ladies at The View took her to task, if you will. And so I listened to a clip from the Fox News 5, in which they kind of played that clip. And so I tried my best to they haven't put it on YouTube yet, so I can't share it directly on our website. So once they put it on YouTube, we can do that. But then it's kind of old news. So we'll play the video, and you can hear the audio of what was said. It starts off with Judge Janine speaking.
The female-powered show wasting no time in attacking Republican women. Whoopi Goldberg completely losing it over Nikki Haley's presidential campaign announcement.
And here's Whoopi.
Since you have been asleep all this time and you just woke up, you're just finding out that there are things about our country that are not perfect. And for us to pretend that it is and that nothing happened is ridiculous. So you're not saying anything new. But the idiocy doesn't end there. Whoopi can't tell the difference between these two Republican senators who have the same last name. We do deserve to have two strong parties. Black Tim Scott, right? Because there are two Scotts, and I don't know how to differentiate them without a picture. Yeah. So
Rick Scott and Tim Scott?
Rick Scott and Tim Scott, Right. Tim Scott is black, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what's amazing about all of them is they play the race card all the time. But then when you have a conservative who's a woman and considers herself and is a woman of color, they want to trash her immediately. So Sunny Hostin previously trashed Nikki Haley when she said she was a chameleon for using the name Nikki. He uses the name Sunny instead of Asuncion because we can't pronounce it. Remember that, Jesse?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Sunny, Whoopi, Joy, all of them are ridiculous. I don't.
Yeah, so I would have to agree with Jesse on that. That was pretty ridiculous for Whoopi to say she can't distinguish between Florida Senator Scott and South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. I mean, their last names are the same, but their first names are not. And, it's just ludicrous. That whole, I don't watch The View, obviously. And so this clip only came to my attention because it was on the Fox 5. And that was only came to my attention because somebody shared it because I was at work, didn't see it. But I understand she did.
Yeah, I always feel.
Charleston. Go ahead.
Yeah, I always feel dumber after I listen to a clip from them. It's unfortunate that they're even taking up the oxygen. But
Yes.
the one thing with Governor Haley's conference yesterday, it was streamed live around the country and around the world, really. And she never got to 2,000 viewers. So, that's not a good sign. It's just not a good sign. And like I said, that's a long layoff from 2018 to 2023. She tried to stay current. She probably should have done more to get a job in the media, I think, just to stay visible, which is what many people do when they're out of office, but they're thinking about running for a higher office. And I just don't think it's the time. She does have youth on her side, so she could, try to get out there a bit and then try again in 2028 if we're still here. We try to get, try to do it again, because she's certainly a lot younger than many of the people that are thinking of running, or some of the people that are thinking of running. And she did yesterday suggest that anybody who runs for public office that's 75 or over take a cognitive ability test. Now who she's taking a shot at there. It's not just Joe Biden. It's Donald Trump as well.
No. Yeah. Now, listen, you know what? I'm going to agree with her, except I say 70. I say 70 above. And I had somebody say, well, you know what? You need to make it everybody takes it, because otherwise you're what was the word?
Yeah, discriminating. Yeah.
Discriminating. And I said, you know what? Here's the thing, though. If you're in the military, there's an age limit. If you're a pilot, there's an age limit. If you're a bus driver, there's an age limit. So there are a lot of things out there that have age limits for particular reasons, and safety being one of those. And I can't think that the commander-in-chief of the United States military does not need to be cognitively able to command all of our forces. And therefore, I think it absolutely should come with, if you're the vice president or the president, you should have to take a cognitive test. And I'd be fine if you gave that cognitive test to everybody. I'm okay with that. Just the president and the vice president, not all the members of Congress, because we could talk all day long about Feinstein and how long she's been out of the loop mentally.
If you recall, during the pandemic, Dr. Mark Siegel on Fox talked to President Trump about that. And President Trump went into detail about the cognitive test that they do take for the presidency. It's part of the medical exam that they go through, and they go through a rigorous medical exam every year as being the president. And he mentioned what it was, and he came through, of course, with flying colors. Look, you might not like the guy, but he's sharp. I mean,
That's right.
Sharp. I mean, what are you going to do? There's people in the Senate like Chuck Grassley who are well into their 80s that are very sharp. It comes and goes. Everybody's different. But I can't imagine that Joe Biden passed that test. I can't, because when President Trump got into the particulars of it, it wasn't an easy thing to do. So,
no, I
think it was just a chance. It was just a chance for her to take a shot, I think. So,
sorry, I have cat problems. She was up there on the table.
Hecklers.
Yeah, that's exactly. They're hecklers on my table. I'm gonna have to murder them.
That's what cats do.
Yeah, it absolutely is. No, and I agree with you that was a shot across the bow. But you know what? What did Trump say when he ran in 15 for the 16 office? He said, "If you hit me, I'm going to hit you back 10 times as hard." So Nikki, stand by, because I'm telling you right now, he's going to hit you hard. And it can be argued that she quit her job as governor, and then she quit her job as the UN ambassador. So nobody likes quitters. So that may not bode well for her.
Yeah.
Now,
I think the timing was bad with the resignation of the
yeah.
UN ambassador. I mean, if you wanted to do that, you probably waited till after the midterms. That's kind of, there's a lot of turnover at that time when you have a new House and Senate coming in. There's always a lot of turnover politically in Washington at that time. So you probably could have waited a couple of months, but to leave in October right before the midterms, it kind of made President Trump look a little shaky internationally and cabinet wise. I know that's not an official cabinet position, but it's close.
Right.
And I just think, like you said, he doesn't forget.
He doesn't forget. He's got a long memory. The other thing I'll say is what you said about her having been out of the limelight, for 4 years. But even 2 years, it's you just kind of become forgotten. I mean, the things in the political world move quickly. I know you and I talked earlier. There was a friend who was going to try to help us with the podcast that we're doing, and he was, going to be able to put it up. And he said it would take him 3 or 4 days to get it ready to go up. And we both went, no, politics. So you can't wait even 24 hours to post something, or it's old news and nobody cares. So it has to be instantaneous. But so what I'll say to that is that's one of the reasons why I will be stunned if we do not see Florida Governor Ron DeSantis get in this race, because his time is in 26. And so he would essentially have to wait at least 2 more years. And if it's a Republican who wins, he's going to have to wait 6 more years, because obviously if the Republican wins in 24, they're going to run for re-election in 28. And, it doesn't bode well for him, because people say, oh, well, he could run in 28. I can't imagine what person we could elect who couldn't beat Joseph Biden if he, in fact, is going to be their candidate. But even if he's not, just looking at the field that the Democrats have to work with, their bench is super shallow. So I don't see anybody from the Democratic bench who has a chance unless there's some serious shenanigans that take place, which, as we all know, is quite likely to happen. But again, so I predict a Republican win in 24, which means a person like Ron DeSantis would not be eligible to run again until 32. And that's a long time. No, excuse me, 28.
Yeah, 28.
That's a long time.
Yeah. Well,
no, 32.
If it does happen,
because you'd have the person who wins in 24 would run for re-election in 28, and so then you wouldn't have another opportunity to run for president as a Republican until 32. So so he can't afford to not run.
I think the thing that Governor DeSantis has to look at is, 1, what the field is. 2, can he beat President Trump? 3, is he interested? Is he interested in the VP slot? I mean, that's another thing. But as far as being governor of Florida, if he serves till 2026, right, he gets out in January of 2027. And we're talking about the presidential campaign right now. So it's not that, I mean, he could get in 2027, especially if it's President Trump, because President Trump will be term limited out anyway. So it's not like the Nikki Haley situation where you're talking about she's out of office, completely out of the limelight. And here's Governor DeSantis right through till 2026, in the beginning of 2027 as Florida governor, and then launching his campaign, let's say in February of 2027 for 2028. I mean, that's basically what Nikki Haley's doing now. I mean, she's February of the year before the election.
But it's just,
it's coming up in November. So
it's a gamble. But you're right. It's a game that, okay, if he doesn't get in, then he has to go full bore behind President Trump, because anybody else, any other Republican gets in the race and wins, then he's basically screwed himself until 32. So he has to want Trump to win. And then if Trump doesn't win, well, this is terrible to think this way, but the only way that Ron DeSantis then has another shot in 28 is if no other Republican wins. We get another Democrat. Oh my God, the horror of that thought's just, So,
the other thing too is
Ron DeSantis gets in. That's my prediction.
The only reason I hesitate to say that is because I think that he really is dedicated to that job down there. And I agree. I know my family lives down there, and he wants to finish the job. And I don't know that he'll bail. I really don't. He seems very loyal to the people of Florida. That's his home. He's been there a long time.
But the people of Florida actually chanted at his re-election. You see his re-election speech? They chanted 2 more run.
Yeah.
So,
but I think there's a lot of people that don't want him to leave. So.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that whole. In fact, I've spoken to them. All right, John. So next on top, we have a little discussion of something that came up in Myrtle Beach just on the 14th of Valentine's Day. I'm not sure that that was the best time for this resolution, but there was a resolution voted on and approved by the Myrtle Beach City Council and signed off by the mayor, Brenda Bethune. And I'm going to put that up on the screen on a big laptop. You'll be able to see it. If you're on your phone, it'll be a little more difficult to see. But anyway, it says, whereas South Carolina is one of only 2 states in the United States that does not have any law on hate crimes, and whereas H3005 and H3014 and H3020 are currently being considered by the House Judiciary Committee, and similar bills, State 003, State 0296 are currently being considered by the Senate Judiciary Committee, which would establish hate crime legislation for South Carolina. And whereas legislation would provide penalties for a person convicted of a crime with the intent to assault, intimidate, or threaten a person because of his race, his or her, it should say, his, her, they, them, she, whatever, race, religion, color, sex, age, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity. And whereas in December of 22, the Federal Bureau of Investigation released hate crime statistics for 2021, an annual compilation of bias-motivated incidents in the United States, and hate crimes remain across the country. And whereas the city of Myrtle Beach condemns all groups and individuals whose ideologies are based on hate, violence, divisiveness, and intolerance. And whereas we desire to promote the safe and quiet enjoyment of all residents and visitors, whereas the Municipal Association of South Carolina states, because South Carolina is one of only 2 states that have not enacted statewide hate crimes legislation, companies are choosing to not locate in the state or host events at municipal venues, causing cities and towns to lose valuable economic development opportunities. Whereas we are committed to promoting a community that is unified, where people of different races, religions, sexual orientation, and ethnic backgrounds resolve together to overcome the challenges of its past and become stronger and more inclusive. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the mayor and city council of the city of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, that we call upon the South Carolina governor to immediately enact a hate crime law for the state of South Carolina. Be it further resolved that a copy of the resolution be delivered to the governor's office, the House Judiciary Committee, and the Senate Judiciary Committee, sealed, signed, and adopted this 14th day of February 2023. Signed, Brenda Bethune. Of course, the attesting is Jennifer Adkins, the city clerk. Well, John, I believe you were telling me that a similar piece of legislation was recently struck down in your home state.
Yeah, so in New York, there was a major victory yesterday for free speech, as it says. The United States District Court for the Southern District of New York, Judge Andrew Carter, enjoined a New York hate speech law regulating social media and the like. It's Volokh versus James. Letitia James is the AG, so that's who you would take to court. And they had included in that what's called the hateful conduct law, and it was declared blatantly unconstitutional as an attack on free speech.
Yep.
First Amendment. Complete. It's a First Amendment case. So basically the argument is, look, even your right to be hateful is preserved under the First Amendment. And I would think that this may open the door, if anybody wants to challenge it, to hate crimes laws that exist all around the country.
I agree.
Because they are a violation of the First Amendment. Now, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to, this is my opinion, when it comes to hate crimes legislation, all that is an attaboy for politicians. That's all it is. Doesn't change anything. The amount of hate crimes has gone up and not down since legislation like this was put in place. And there are other ways to remedy this. If you're charged with an assault and you're beating someone up and you say, nasty things about the person while you're doing it, well, guess what? The judge has some discretion there to say, okay, you know what? This guy, he's going to get the full penalty because of what he was doing while it was going on. You don't have to have separate legislation. If it's an organized group, well, then you have conspiracy to commit assault. So you can include that. And if it's a group that is based solely on hate or
hate for a particular
display
group. Yeah.
of hateful attitude, right? If that group and they conspire to commit actions anywhere, then you have federal RICO charges that can be enjoined. So, I mean, there's plenty of ways to take care of this.
Yeah.
So this idea of hate crimes, and we're one of the only states, look, they're not necessary. They're just an attaboy for politicians to say, hey, look what we did, end racism, right? Like, like in the goal, like in the end zone at the Super Bowl, end racism. Like, like we really like racism. Yeah, end racism. So nobody's gonna be against that. But this idea of hate crimes legislation, it's ineffective. You don't need it. And it really, you should just allow judges to do their jobs. Let them do their jobs. If someone is involved in something like that, well, then good, throw the book at them. But you don't need this extra add-on. If you assault somebody and you get 10 years and then you get 5 years because they said bad things, I mean, the whole idea is just silly, and it does violate the First Amendment, in my opinion.
I like it. And I think in addition to the First Amendment being something that points out that this is a violation, I think the 14th Amendment, the Equality Clause, is actually pretty good. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, sort of the last section in that, it says that no state shall any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. So you and I were talking about it before we started, and I said that's essentially saying if you murder, the judge can't say, well, I'm going to give you 5 years, but if you murder a black guy or a black female or a female, any minority, that the judge is going to say, well, now you're going to get an extra 5 years. That's not how the law is supposed to be. If you commit murder, murder's a crime. Now, like you noted, if the judge finds out that in those circumstances of the murder that you're yelling and screaming, I hate all black men, I'm gonna kill them all, okay, then he could say, well, my latitude is I can give you a minimum of 7, I can give you a maximum of life, so I'm going to meet in the middle because you're a terrible person and this is a particularly egregious crime, so I'm going to give you 30 years. So you have latitude, and I think that it just doesn't sound good. It doesn't make good legal precedents, in my opinion, to start labeling crimes more heinous than the other by virtue of the color of someone's skin, their sexuality, their gender identity, etc. Because I think a slippery slope when people start saying, well, I know he only hit me because I identify as non-binary. Because anybody can say that. I mean, literally, I can be angry with you and you attack me, and not kill me, but you attack me, and I can just suddenly say, well, he did it because I'm non-binary. She said she was non-binary. Maybe I made it up just because I want you to get that extra time. There's a lot of problems with that. And so I'm not thinking it's a great idea to move forward. I want to touch on one other thing in the 14th Amendment while we're talking about that. There's been a lot of discussion, not a lot, but several people have posted that they don't believe that Nikki Haley is qualified because she is not, in their opinion, a natural born citizen of the United States. And so I would just point to those individuals to take a look at the 14th Amendment, because it pretty clearly says if you're born, in fact, it says all persons born and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state in which they're born. So she was born in South Carolina, and South Carolina, last time I checked, was within the jurisdiction of the United States, thus making her a United States citizen with all rights and privileges afforded thereof. Now, I understand that.
I think I really blame most of this issue, the problem that there is with this natural born citizen issue, and it comes up all the time. I mean, it came up with Barry Goldwater in 1964 because
John
when
McCain,
he was born in Arizona,
Obama,
it wasn't a state. Yeah. It comes up all Ted Cruz. It comes up all the time. And I think really that Congress and or the courts should have clarified this a long time ago, because what natural born citizen meant when they wrote the Constitution is one thing, and what it has evolved into via court cases is another thing. So you're talking about two different issues. There's no doubt that if you went by the standards set originally when the Constitution was written, Governor Haley could not run. Period.
Right.
But
run either.
Like I said, it has
slave.
evolved, and I think what Congress should do is pass legislation. And I don't think there would be a problem with clarifying that, and also stating that if your parents are in this country legally, they don't have to be citizens. They could be here on a visa. They could be here on a work visa. They could be here on a travel visa. If they're in the country legally and you're born here, you are eligible to be president or vice president. But if they're here illegally, you should not be. Period.
I agree.
So I think they clarify that once and for all, so we can forget about all this stuff with Nikki Haley and Ted Cruz and President Obama and John McCain because he was born in a
An anchor baby.
Just clarify it and let's move on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I'm even willing to go one step further than what you just said. I'm even willing to say that that it's not enough that they be here legally. That they're here as on a student visa. They're here as a government representative from another country. I say that one of the parents, not both, at least one of the parents needs to already have been a citizen, whether it's through naturalization or born here, whatever, in order for you to be an American citizen. I'd be willing to go to that level, but I certainly would settle for what you said because what we currently have leaves too many questions. But I just feel like the 14th Amendment kind of lays that out. If you're born in the confines of the United States, then you are a natural born citizen. So
yeah, and it's obvious why they put it. It's obvious why they put it in because at the time they were nervous about people coming over the 14th Amendment, yes, but when they put it in originally, when they wrote the Constitution, there was this great worry that foreign royalty would come in and have someone would have a child and then all of a sudden they could lay claim. Now it seems silly now, but at the time that's the way the world operated, and it didn't apply to the people. It didn't apply to anyone who was born until the Constitution was ratified. I think Van Buren was the first president that was actually born in the United States when it was the United States.
Right.
So all of those people before him would have been ineligible. So they had to waive that. Because
exactly.
You couldn't be a natural born citizen
George
of a country that
Washington,
didn't
ineligible.
exist. Yeah. Right. They were all British subjects.
So that's one of the things I do understand, that by the definition that you're trying to enforce on other people, our first handful of presidents would themselves have been ineligible. So yeah, but anyway, so I found that interesting. So it could well be that South Carolina is going to produce not just one presidential contender, but very likely Tim Scott is. They were discussing Tim Scott, that mentioned him and confused him between Rick Scott from Florida. But there's a chance that Tim Scott may actually throw his hat in the ring for president as well. And I don't know whether he has a genuine desire to be president, or once again we have a case of someone wants to be the vice president and rehearsing for that job. I don't think that Tim Scott has the bona fides to do it. That's just my personal opinion. I've not been impressed with him in terms of his national ambitions. I think he's been a good senator. He's got a 90% conservative voting record, so he's done a fair job there. A little bit higher, but I'll take 90% over Lindsey Graham's paltry 79%. But I just don't think that he is ready for that stage. Maybe he's a cabinet member. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, he could be angling for the vice presidential slot. There's no doubt about that. And he has an excellent relationship with President Trump for sure. I know he's been very supportive of him and President Trump of Senator Scott as well. As far as in the future, yeah, it could set you up for other things. There's no doubt about that. I get the feeling sometimes that senators, particularly someone like Senator Scott, and I could see this happening, you get very frustrated up there with what's going on. He doesn't seem like he's too confrontational, which is great. I think that's great, especially in the Senate, because it's supposed to be somewhat deliberative. But I would imagine that he probably gets a little fed up with all the nonsense with Mitch McConnell still forever leading the show up there and not being able to do what conservative senators really want to do, because McConnell is anything but that. I read a piece 2 days ago that Mitch McConnell's favorability ratings are lower than George Santos's.
I believe that. I believe that. I've said we needed new leadership in the Senate, and Mitch McConnell, when you can't win the Senate when they had such there's just no excuse for not having picked up enough seats to be the majority with this idiot in the White House. And that speaks to his failure of leadership, in my personal opinion. Jump back real quickly to the resolution that Myrtle Beach put forward, because I think folks need to understand that even if you are in support of the hate crimes bill that Myrtle Beach has put forward as their resolution, I want folks to understand who exactly is signing on to that. Mayor Brenda Bethune is, in my opinion, she's actually a Democrat. She's not a Republican. And she is on a video on a mic having said that she said, quote, "I believe children should pick the gender of their choice." Now, rather than me just quote that to you, I'm going to play this audio for you to hear yourself. Here we go. And of course, it's not playing.
That's how we get equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's not just about race. It's about sexual preferences. It's about if a child.
It went off on me when I turned it. Hold on. Let me back that up so you can hear that again, so you can hear that she wants children.
It's about having empathy and respect for others. That's how we get equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's not just about race. It's about sexual preferences. It's about if a child decides they want to be a male or a female. It's about loving everyone.
So she believes a child should be able to determine if they are a male or a female. So you take that to the obvious conclusion. I've got a son who's 15, and thank God he's heterosexual and doesn't have any questions about that. But let's say he came home one day and said, "Mom, I think I want to be a female. I'm going to start taking hormone blockers, and I want to have some, sexual reconstruction done." I'm going to say, "Well, son, let's go get you into some counseling. Let's sit down with somebody and talk through what happened, what changed, what makes you feel that way. Because you're 15, you're not decisions because under the law, John, the last time I checked, you can't, as a minor, go get a tattoo." But this mayor seems to be arguing that kids can go out and say, "Well, I don't want to be a boy anymore. I want to be a girl. So let's go remove my penis. Let's have me, my genitals mutilated. And I don't want to be female anymore. Let's take my breast off." And I do not believe that, having taught high school, and I know you did as well, that children at that age have the cognitive ability to make any kind of really rational, life-changing decisions that are permanent.
And I think the larger issue is just another example of people on the left, and that's what Mayor Bethune is. It's people on the left want the government to replace the parent.
Yeah.
Period. And that's why I like to call them government schools and not public schools. Only parents should make that decision for minors. If your child had to go for elective surgery of any type, the parents have to be in on it. But the fact that people in schools, whether they be guidance counselors or teachers, and they push children into this line of thought, to me, is mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling. The fact that you have people recommending abortions to children at 14, 15, 16 without parental notification, and then bringing kids to abortion clinics. You have a major medical procedure without the parents being involved. All of this is the government replacing the parent, and an attack on the family as a unit in this country. It's all the same cloth.
Right. So I'm going to agree with David over from Moms for Liberty, who said that, he believed this was just another attempt for the government to kind of come between parents and to really attack those of us who are Christians and conservatives who believe that, there's one man and one woman, and you're born a man, you're born a woman, and you die a man, you die a woman, regardless of what you do to yourself physically. You don't change your genetics. You can't change the makeup of your DNA. So if you look at her bill where she wants to have this hate crime bill, I mean, that's just step one. And then she's clearly vocalizing there that she believes children have the right to make these determinations. And I just think to myself, you have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know anything about child psychology. You've clearly never taken an early childhood course in which they tell you about the development of their brains. And I've said this before. I grew up with, there's 6 of us. So there were 3 girls and 3 boys. I was the youngest. And the closest to age from me were my twin brothers, who were 5 years older than I was. So I basically grew up with two older brothers, because by the time I was old enough to know what was going on, my older siblings had already moved out and married. But as a young female, I mean, we roughed house and everything else. And I remember thinking, gosh, I wish I was a boy, because they get to do really cool stuff. And I'm so grateful that I grew up in that time period as opposed to today, because I've spoke to many people, women, who we were all considered what was used to be called the term tomboy. And I fear that if I had parents in today's era, that they would have probably given me some kind of hormone therapy, or, had me undergo the breast removal and all of the rest of it. And then I wouldn't be a happily married woman with a son and, a beautiful family. And so that is really to think that kind of thing can happen, because obviously I was a kid. I was 5 or 6, and I remember going camping and my brothers could stand up and pee. And I thought, oh my God, I want to be able to do that. I was 5. So,
Well,
yeah.
maybe your parents wouldn't have suggested it, but I guess the great fear is that the government schools would have suggested it. Some social worker would have suggested it. Some guidance counselor would have suggested it. And then they take you down that path. I read an article the other day. I think it was in New Hampshire, where a mother was suing a school system because they had one of the guidance counselors had her daughter strapping down her breasts, 14-year-old girl, in the school when she's at school. And then obviously when she had to go home, she had to take all of that off. But to even go down that road with a 14-year-old without parental knowledge or notification, again, it's just mind-boggling. And you have to wonder where these people are coming from. They just, what it is? I mean, my thought is always that most of these people that try to make these decisions are godless, and they're trying to play God. I mean, that's really a big part of it.
Well, not only do I think they're godless, in a lot of cases, I think they're trying to normalize their behavior by having more people, what does this mean? So they're trying to get more people to join in their misery, so they can, feel like, well, see, I'm normal. There's more people like me. And I'll give you another example. And this, I'm an adult now, obviously. And there was a gentleman that I used to get my hair cut, and he would cut and style my hair. And he was gay. But then he told me that binary, and I didn't care, just cut my hair, do whatever. I don't, what you do at home in your bedroom is your business. But I stopped going to him for a couple of reasons. But one of them was because one day I'm in the chair and he's talking about this non-binary, whatever. And I'm really trying to figure out, I'm trying to hear it from their side. Explain to me what this means to be non-binary. How can you not, identify as a male? And so in the course of his explanation, he looks at me and he says, I think you're non-binary. And I said, what? And he said, yeah. He goes, I think you're a good example of non-binary. And I said, why would you say that? And he said, well, you send a lot of athletic apparel. And I said, you do know I was a college athlete and a college coach and a high school coach, and I own a sporting goods store. So wearing a dress is not something
that's the obvious, right?
And I thought to myself, if he had known me when I taught at the Christian schools I taught at, where we had to wear a dress, that was part of what we wore as teachers and administrators, then he probably wouldn't have thought that. But I didn't go back to that guy. And then in hindsight, I thought about it. I said, what if there was some young 18, 16, 15-year-old kid that he's cutting their hair and he's telling them that garbage? Someone who's not confident and sure of themselves and doesn't have a relationship with them. And I thought, that's not good. But that's what they do, because he wanted me to be like him. And I said, dude, I'm married. I'm a woman, all woman. I promise you, I don't have any questions. I don't wake up in the morning going, what am I? I don't. I'm very confident in my sexuality. So it was just really, there used to be this thing in the military that they didn't want you to try and induce anybody else into homosexuality. That was one of the things that you could get kicked out for. And a lot of my gay friends said, that's ridiculous. We don't go around recruiting people. And I think back at this moment, I was like, well, that's pretty much what this guy was doing. Recruit me to his side, and I wasn't having it.
But you know what? It's one thing to recruit adults. It's another thing to recruit kids. And if you're even talking about sexuality is difficult enough, even when you're just dealing with two genders.
Yeah.
But when you start involving this other 40 made up ones that are
Oh,
around,
it's 97.
yeah,
California
whatever it
had
is, yeah,
97.
they add them all the time. I mean, come up with a round number, would you please?
Really.
But yeah, it's, if you're approaching children with any of this stuff, I think that's a problem. And again, it's just a way for the government to try to get in between parents and children.
Yeah, and I think I've seen some research that has actually come out and said that the brain does not fully really function in terms of you being a completed adult until like age 25. So even a college kid, um, they're 18, 19, 20, 21, in the true sense of the word, they have not finished developing. And so I know from experience, and I don't know, I'm sure you could relate to this, having taught it at Christian schools, there's been several students who I've had, and I've watched them grow from a freshman, to a senior, and then they go off to some liberal college, and then they graduate, and they are like two different people. And the left would argue, well, they were in high school, you were brainwashing them and all this religious stuff, and we just deprogrammed them. No, that's not true. Free will is a real thing in Christian schools, and we believe that right to choose because the Lord gives us the right to choose. But I do honestly believe that when they get into these colleges, like you said, these government institutions, that it is just a course of indoctrination. The education of students is no longer a real thing. I know you mentioned earlier that Nikki Haley had said, where was it that she made the statement about folks that came here legally?
Oh yeah, she was at a Dr. Oz event. Remember Dr. Oz? They talk about how political fame is fleeting. I haven't seen his name in the news for a while. So yeah, right. But you lose to Fetterman, you're pretty much done. Yeah. What she said was, she was at an event and she said legal immigrants are more patriotic than most Americans these days. That's a topic that I think politically, whenever you compare and contrast, you're not going to win because you're probably going to tick off both sides. So just leave it alone. Just leave it alone.
Yeah, I defended her a little bit earlier, and so I want to share that with folks. I think what she was trying to say, I mean, you and I are red-blooded Americans, and I feel like people in the boomer and the X and even some of the Zoomers, if you will, my son's group. Well, and that's just because he's mine. I can't really speak to that being the truth across the board. But we grew up in a time when you learned history, you learned patriotism. I mean, I remember standing up and saying the Pledge of Allegiance, all this kind of things. I love my country. I served as a member of the United States Navy. My husband's a retired Army officer. So a sincere love of country. And I've lived abroad, so I've seen how the other half of the world lives in both Europe and in Asia. So you and I have a sense of patriotism that's not probably as common in today's youth, because I feel like, I don't feel like I know. I've been in these classrooms. I've taught in the government schools, if you will, and I've seen my peers not teaching the same values that I teach in the same classroom, which kind of goes to this idea that, well, we can keep critical race theory out of the classrooms by not having it in the curriculum. But I promise you, teachers have so much autonomy in those classrooms, they can choose teach what they want. So I had the same course, same textbooks, everything else that the other 4 teachers in my cohort had, but my classroom was very different in the way that I presented that evidence and talked to the students using primary sources, etc. So I feel like one of the reasons why she said that is because a lot of our young people today are not coming up with love of country. They're not coming up with patriotism and the blessing it is to be born in the United States. Whereas some of these new immigrants who legally come here, they are fleeing, in often cases, socialist countries, communist countries, oppressive regimes, and they come here and understand what it is to have liberty and freedom that they found in the United States. They really learn our history, because part of one of the things I did in my AP courses is I would give my students the citizens exam, and it was amazing to me how many of them could not pass it. So that told me a lot about, before we ever taught anything, I gave it to them, because these folks were mostly seniors, a couple of juniors, but only juniors and seniors are allowed to be in AP US history at the school that I taught at. So I gave them this exam at the beginning, and then I gave it to them again at the end. And that was, to me, that was a better scoring than any of the AP tests that they were going to take, in my opinion. And so I don't think I ever had more than just a handful of students who passed it at the first time they took it. So I believe that when you are here legally and you take that citizens exam, you have a greater understanding of our founding fathers and the documents and the premise for which our country was designed to uphold than a lot of our current young people. I hate to say it. So, and I get what you're saying, that, yeah, obviously I probably would have been like, what?
Just don't go there. Yeah.
I'm patriotic. They're not more patriotic than me. They haven't served in uniform. So I totally get what you're saying. But I think if she had clarified her statement a little bit more, instead of said, then the young people coming out of the schools today, she probably would have come away looking
just say
better.
some.
Right.
Some Americans, not most. It's the qualifier that got her in trouble. But ultimately, I suppose, again, it's just an indictment of our government schools. Because
absolutely.
nobody's, that's exactly what it is. If you don't teach history accurately, you will not understand what the framers and the founders went through to get us where we are now. And if you don't understand any of that, you're not going to have pride in what you are, because you don't know what you are.
Yeah. And to that end, the next segment, I want to talk a little bit about some things that have been discovered right here in South Carolina. There are 2 elementary schools that are using something that's called the Ron Clark Academy teaching curriculum, if you will. And so I'm going to put up on the screen and let you see it. And I think you'll be able to see this right off the bat. So Lakewood Elementary and Waterway Elementary have been confirmed to be using what's called the Ron Clark Academy. Now, the picture that you see in the middle of that is someone took out their phone and took a screenshot of the video clip that was being played for the students at these elementary schools. And can you read what's in the background of that teacher, John?
Yeah, it says 1619, which is a very important date in curriculum circles these days.
Yes. So this is from the 1619 project, and it is embedded in the Ron Clark Academy. That's really, for lack of a better way for people to understand what that is, it's just another form of critical race theory that's being perpetuated upon our youth. So when you hear folks say, and I love Ken Richardson to death, and Ken had said, because he was questioned about critical race theory when he was on campaign, and he had said, there's no critical race theory in schools. And I thought, oh, Ken, you just stepped in it, buddy, because I'm telling you right now, as I said earlier, teachers have so much autonomy that I promise you that they are, in fact, teaching this. Now, I don't know any way to mitigate that short of putting cameras in every classroom so that you can literally what is being presented to students. And, you and I talked on Tuesday about how the pandemic or plandemic, whatever you want to call it, really opened the eyes of parents, because as you noted, they're walking by their kid's laptop and they notice, what did they just say? What are you looking at? And so it was eye-opening, revelatory information that these parents were discovering exactly what their kids had been learning all this time in these government schools. So again, this is something that I'm confident it's not just in those 2 elementary schools. It's probably in all of them. And so we think, okay, well, we're not allowing them to teach 1619. We're to teach CRT. Okay, fine. They'll just use something called the Ron Clark Academy, which in itself teaches those same subject matters. And some of the teachers have actually openly said, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to teach it anyway because I think it's important. And that's a huge problem.
Even though it's not true, right? Even though it's inaccurate.
Right, even though it's completely patently false. It's frustrating to me, and I almost think that we need to hold these superintendents, we need to hold these principals accountable, because they absolutely should be the ones checking the pulse of these schools, and they first and foremost should be the ones to say, did you know that your teachers were presenting this information to students at your school? And if their response is anything other than, well, I've been in a coma for the last 6 months, and so no, I couldn't have known, then they should be fired. Because 1, if they didn't know it was being taught, they're negligent in their duties as a principal, because you're supposed to be going in and monitoring these classrooms. And 2, if they did know that it was being taught, then you're violating what has been put into law. And last time I checked, fairly confident our state legislature put forward some laws that said, no CRT, no 1619 will be taught in the state of South Carolina. So either way you look at it, if they're negligent and they didn't know, ignorance, you ought to be fired. And if they did know, then you ought to be fired. So we have a serious crisis within our schools when this kind of material is being taught. And again, I think, John, you hit it right on the head. We can't call these things public schools anymore. We call them what they are, which is government school, run for the purpose of manipulation of our students, their mindset.
Yeah, but the public's role was eliminated a long time ago, little by little by little. Again, I saw you separating the kid from the parent. And the only thing that got parents back involved was the pandemic, and people started to see what was going on. I think parents that were really involved before that knew it was coming, and that's why you saw movement into other schools. But it's reached into Christian schools as well, and private schools and charter schools. And that's mostly because of the lack of textbooks.
Yes.
We talked about this before. There are very few textbooks available. They're controlled mostly by the one company. Pearson's the big company up at the top, and that was all done during the Common Core with Obama. And I mean, I could teach a class just on that mess, but it works its way into every school. And if you're going to get on top of it, it starts with somebody who's the superintendent, but then it's got to go to the principal, then it's got to go to the department chair. And you have to make sure that when you have lesson plans, now it's always going to come up. It's always going to come up. You always have teachers that are going to step past the line. There are some that will engage on one side of an issue. I mean, I can go back to my experience as a high school teacher. I used to tell my students the first day, if you are a conservative, I will be a liberal. If you are a liberal, I will be a conservative, because I'm going to challenge you on any point that you make. I'm going to challenge you. And it's all because of educational purposes. I'm not here to take sides. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to get you to think. So if it gets a little heated, don't take it. Yeah. I'm not teaching how to. I'm just trying to get you to think. I'm not trying to teach you how to think or what to think about. I'm going to challenge you, and don't take it personally. If I get into your grill a little about your stance, I might not believe it at all. And that's the way I approach my classes. And I taught government and U.S. history for 22 years. In an all-boys school, and guess what? It worked.
Yeah,
it worked. When the kids get to the end of the class and they can't figure out where you're coming from, that's a good thing.
Yeah,
especially when you're teaching history and government. The other part is a lot of this has found its way into other parts of the curriculum. It's not just history. I mean, they got rid of all the classics in English literature. When you look at math problems, they weave it into math problems. They weave it into science.
Oh, yeah.
They've taken every subject that they can take and taken all of this nonsense and inserted it into that part of the curriculum. And it's something that has to be policed at a very strong level. And I'll say it again, like I said the other day, it's also why Johnny and Janie can't read. They spend all of this time on multiculturalism and nonsense like that. And it's very important to talk about people's cultures, but you don't have to live in it. Right? You want to bring it as to be, bring your strengths and let's go. But it's really a crime that our education system has shifted in that direction rather than concentrating on the things that we need to concentrate on so kids can be, grow into adults and be successful contributors to this great society we have.
Yeah. To that end, I think an organization that kind of really kicked off because of the COVID, call it, was a group called Moms for Liberty. And here in Horry County, we have one as well, Moms for Liberty. And it's unusual, or more unusual than most, because it is actually headed up not by a mom, but by a dad. And his name is David Warner. Now, David and I came to know one another because he was running for school board council. So we became friends, talking to one another and learning about where his strengths and what his passions were. And of course, he has a child with special needs. And so that's one of the reasons why he advocates for his son. And he kind of got involved with Moms for Liberty. Now he's just taken the chapter here in Horry County. And a lot of this evidence that we've been able to present is due in part to David's work in bringing it to light, because I don't have the time to cover every single subject. Because there's a plethora of things going on across our state. One of the other things I wanted to talk about, we just don't have the time today, but maybe next time, is, if you saw Ohio, what's happened there with that train derailment, South Carolina as well. But there is a dam in Greenville County that is, I believe, 130 years old. And when it was built, it was only built to withstand 50 years. and it's crumbling and cracking, and they're very concerned about it and have been for a number of years, decades, in fact. Factories that used to use that dam would dump all of their chemicals, their toxic waste, everything else into that water because, that was before we had the EPA. We had anybody saying, you probably shouldn't dump that in the water. Quick history note here. A lot of folks don't realize that antifreeze was an accident. DuPont was dumping chemicals into the water, and what they noticed is that when the winter set in and it got really cold, there was a section of the water where they were dumping things that would not freeze, and that was where they were putting in their antifreeze. So that's really how that even came to be a thing. But going back to Greenville County, this dam is cracking and crumbling. So if it really begins to leak profusely, it is going to affect all of the rivers and the water sources downstream, and that is a huge problem. But again, all of those plants and everything, manufacturing units that were there, have long since shuttered, and there's no one even alive who has responsibility. So everybody's sort of saying, well, it's going to cost $1 billion to do this, and who's going to pay for it? And the county doesn't have the money, and the state doesn't have the money, so we need to go to the federal. The city doesn't have the money, so everybody's saying, well, I can't pay for it, you pay for it. So at some point in time, we need to step up and have a problem, and this needs to be addressed. And I don't want it to be addressed after we have something catastrophic happen, like what happened in Ohio, where they decided just to burn a chemical agent that essentially led to, more or less, they gassed an entire community with a chemical that hasn't been used since World War I. So I don't know what the answer is, but what we're currently doing is not the right answer. So we have a lot of issues in our state that need to be addressed. But again, kind of going back to what I was saying about the Moms for Liberty here in Horry County, I deeply appreciate what David has been able to do in terms of bringing out this information so that we can put it out there to the public. So if you have kids that are in government schools and you want to find out what's going on in the classroom, and you don't have the time because you work full time or you have other obligations, then I encourage you, please get involved. Go to Moms for Liberty, Horry County, and sign up to get on that page, because I know they welcome you. Find out when the school board meets. Go to these meetings. Look through your kids' textbooks. Get your kids' books out and look through them. I think you'll be stunned, if not appalled, at some of the things you come across in those books. It's high time that we as parents take a more active role in our kids' education. For a long time, we our kids off to school with the assumption that everything was going to be copacetic and they were going to learn the same things we did in the same ways that we did. But Common Core came along and kind of shook the foundation there. And even in California, I don't know if you remember when they went from, they switched from using phonics to using, I don't remember what they even called it.
Whole language learning.
Yeah, whole language learning. And what happened was there was a whole lot of not learning going on. And so I don't think that stayed in place very long before they realized, little Johnny and little Susie couldn't read nothing. And so they scrapped it. And then they added ebonics. I mean, it's just insane. If it's not broke, don't fix it. If people are learning and they're learning well and they're functioning well, we don't need to fix it. So the only purpose behind fixing this, in my opinion, is that they wanted to do something else. And that something else was anything but educate.
Well, and the other part of it, I guess, the buried lead is that when you break it, you spend a lot of money breaking it, and then you have to spend a lot of money fixing it. A lot of people make a lot of money doing it. And
you're right, John.
it's yeah, and that's true of just about any issue. Even you could look at what you just said about the dam up in Greenville. At a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. I would think that a dam is pretty important. That's going to flood a whole city if it lets go. And I'm sure there are hundreds of cases like that all over the country, failing bridges, failing roads, failing dams. And we're going to spend $1.5 trillion on green initiatives instead of fixing what we need to fix.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why, just to kind of close it out, there's been a lot of people talking about I-73. And I think recently it was kind of put to bed, if you will, because they said, look, we've got too many roads, bridges, dams, other things in this state that have to be fixed. I-73 is not on the radar, period. It is dead. Unless the federal government ponies up the money for that, it is never going. There you go.
Good to
hear. Folks, that's kind of all we got for this episode. We certainly appreciate you joining in and would love to have you share. And if you have questions, concerns, don't hesitate to send us that email at palmettopolitics@gmail.com you're concerned about, and we'll do our best to get it on in our next episode. But until then, we'll see you next Tuesday for episode 5, and we'll see what's happening in the world. Thanks a lot. Again, I'm Shannon Grady, and that is
John Cummings. Enjoy your weekend.
have a good one.